Our speaker today is Adam Lewinberg. He is the president of Postal Advocate Incorporated. We're the only mail audit and recovery firm in the U.S. and Canada. We manage a portfolio of 179,000 pieces of mailing equipment for the largest U.S. companies. Adam speaks and teaches nationally on mail savings and industry trends. He is a former industry co-chair of the Boston Postal Customer Council and Mail Systems Management Association. He is CMDSS and MDC certified. He is a featured writer for Mailing Systems Technology magazine. Adam worked for one of the largest mailing vendors for over 17 years, and he was the director of national sales for Presort, tabletop inserters, addressing hardware and software, and green offerings. And he was one of the top 5 account managers nationally, working with some of the nation's largest accounts. Over to you, Adam.
Thanks, Michaela. So today we're going to talk about the top strategies for enterprise postage management. And what we're going to cover today is, first off, why do you need to even care about this? Why is this important? And we'll go through the reasons why. The challenges of managing the enterprise postage is different than if you're a small single-site organization versus a large enterprise. The challenges are different. Visibility and insight. How do you gather the data and report? What things do you need to report on and look for? Technology changes and network connections. This is going to become a much bigger issue over the next couple of years with some mandated USPS changes. Some best-in-class processes. What should you do for, to make sure you're optimizing your operation? How do you manage your billing, your postage management, web access? There's huge developments that have happened in web access to postage and shipping services, which we'll talk about. And then how do you manage the day-to-day requests of your users, in those types of platforms, adding new users, first-line responders, password resets, etc. And then expanding to multi-carrier. There's a lot of opportunities with UPS and FedEx, especially as their rates keep increasing, that could be important for you to know about. So why is enterprise postage management important? Costs are increasing rapidly. Over the last year, we had the largest postal rate increase on record, at least that I can remember. I've been in this industry for 27 years. Typically, rate increases are in the 1 to 4 or 5% range overall. We had 10 to 30% increases over the last year. 10 to 30%. Like, never have we seen anything like this. And you can look at the classes. If you're a large volume mailer, and you send mailings to Presort services and you outsource a lot of your mailings and you think, well, I'm covered from that, you had the highest increases. If you look at these classes, first class auto, auto flats, marketing mail flats, you had 14 to 30% increases where, typical clients had 10 to 27%. Like, it's astronomical. There's a changing support model that people are in. More people are working from home, more people working in small offices. The whole work environment over the last 4 years changed. That requires a different model for supporting people with postage and mailing services. There's changing technology requirements. One of the major mail vendors is they're eliminating their support for analog lines coming this October, so next month. And they're requiring that everybody either be connected to their networks or have mobile connectors that support that. In June 2024, the United States Postal Service has mandated that 70% of the postage meters in the United States need to be replaced to meet new constant connection requirements, which we'll talk more about. And there's also been huge enhancements in cloud-based postage that can dramatically reduce costs in the neighborhood of 60 to 90%, and we'll talk about that. This is usually one of the largest unmanaged spend categories in most organizations. There's really no one who owns it. It's usually very fragmented amongst different groups, and there's usually very limited visibility unless you know what to look for. There's less internal expertise as more mail is outsourced. People who are in the mail industry are retiring. If you go to National Postal Forum, it is a fraction of the show that it once was. There are fewer people in the industry, meaning there's less experts. There's the opportunity to optimize postage funding. Most organizations are pre-funding USPS accounts. There's money sitting on meters. There's either prepaid or credit lines that are set up for postage. And there's no consolidated strategy for funding that, which can lead to significant fees, or it can lead to huge balances sitting in accounts that don't need to be there. And there's a huge opportunity for savings in postage, in shipping costs, in equipment, and in outsourced services. And we're going to go through each one of those. So let's talk about what enterprise postage is in our view. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about this. Every piece of anything that you would call postage hits one of the following categories in an organization. And we haven't found, I'm open to ideas if there's a certain category we missed that would be called mail, but in our view, everything falls into one of these categories, which makes up enterprise mail spends. So first you have mailing equipment and postage. At locations where you have postage meters and mailing systems, you have a cost of equipment and you have the postage that's running through those devices. And that's usually a pretty big cost throughout many organizations. You also have your home, the people who work from home, as well as small offices that don't have equipment, or maybe they have, online subscriptions, individual subscriptions from, online postage accounts and things like that. There's USPS permit accounts, and permit accounts could be direct relationships you have with the post office to fund, large mailings or business reply accounts and things like that. There's outsourced mailers. Many organizations, don't do their mailings anymore in-house, and they use outsourced providers to do the printing, folding, stuffing, and sealing, or even just the pre-sort service where they're coming and picking up your mail. Or you have expedited documents and parcels, which is your UPS, your FedEx, and your postal shipments that are going out the door. But this encapsulates an entire enterprise postage spend, usually fits into one of those categories. So the issue about that is there's no single group that has visibility to that entire spend. Most organizations, in fact, lack visibility to any of the categories, the detail behind any of these categories and specificity. UPS and FedEx, probably they would have the most detail because they get a consolidated bill from UPS and FedEx for their spends, but even those, very few people are digging into the details of them. It's fragmented across multiple business units, departments, or locations. The accounts that we deal with on a regular basis, they could have tens or hundreds or even thousands of locations, and they could have different business units and departments that, without any one person taking full responsibility for this. There's a lack of expertise to properly manage these categories, which we talked about. And there's limited systems besides Excel spreadsheets to control these categories. You can go on, the vendors have their vendor websites, including the Postal Service, but those act as showing you the detail that you need to look up, but they don't consolidate it in a way that gives you dashboards to be able to present this information holistically. And we want to talk about how you can do that. You can do it in Excel yourself, and there are other ways that we're going to show you that could be maybe easier. And it's very labor intensive to find the right data to standardize it into a format that can be managed and maintained. This is basically on Excel. Through this whole presentation, we're going to talk about how you can do all these things yourself. And we're also going to talk to you about how we do it. And so you can see if there's a value for any of the services we're talking about, we're more than happy to help. But throughout this, we're going to give you advice of what you need to know if you want to do this yourself and or through us. Okay, so we don't want to feel like this is just you're pushing you to use us. We're going to give you the ways that you can manage this on your own. So this looks busy, but this goes over every one of those 5 mail categories. What do you need for data? So let's start with the first one. We may not go through all of these, but let's go through a couple of them. For your mail equipment and postage, that's all the mail that's being metered on site, in one of your offices that has a postage meter. It usually represents a fairly large percentage of the spend that organizations have. We think there's a 10 to 55% savings in that category based on proper management of it. And so how do you get your arms around that spend? So first, go to accounts payable. There is 5 or 6 mailing vendors in the industry: Pitney Bowes, Quadient, FP, Stamps.com, Hassler, which is now part of Quadient. And if you do a search on the names that those companies represent, you will get a listing of the detail of where you're spending that money. Then request specific invoices from that accounts payable export so you can have a copy of the invoice. If you're large enough that you have some sort of national account relationship with one of the vendors, request reports from them. Maybe you have some on site. But even if you have those reports, chances are between acquisitions, divestitures, locations that went on their own, there are some locations that you would find in an accounts payable search that the vendor won't even know are properly linked to you. Create logins on the vendor's websites. Link all those accounts that you found in that accounts payable search so you have access on the vendor's websites to all the details of those transactions. Link every location that you can find from those reports, and then pull reports out of those vendor websites into a master Excel data to store the data. So what you want to look for in that data is you want to look for the contract end dates. When do your contracts expire? A lot of the equipment is going to be leased. The equipment cost per device, the postage spends per device, the postage balances that are in each account, as well as the postage that's sitting in meters. Are there any fees and overcharges that you have? And are there any dormant postage accounts that have been sitting there that haven't been used? And that's the way that we would manage it. We do nothing but this. You can do the same things on your own. It just takes the work of pulling this stuff together. And that's how you get complete visibility of that category. Let's look at something like your outsourced mail services. It's very similar. You'd find out who are the outsourced providers that you're using. You'd run an accounts payable search. You'd request some invoice copies, create logins on their websites, itemize the mailings so you can see what services and work performed, and create a master file that can be used to benchmark rates in the future. And so you can see the items to look for are the fees for the different services. You want to benchmark one provider for another, and the potential to renegotiate or run an RFP. So it's very streamlined across all these categories. It's basically the same concepts. It's just knowing where to look for the data, and this is where all the data resides. The savings are on top, you can see, and the savings are significant, especially with the postage increases that you're having. This can offset the postage increases and potentially even provide additional savings. We're willing to do for any client a no-cost assessment of any of the categories that we mentioned above, and we do it at no charge and at no obligation because we find it's the best way for clients, one, to evaluate our services, and two, to see the issues that they probably didn't know existed. Most of the time, clients physically aren't willing to devote that type of effort that we do in order to pull the data together in some sort of streamlined way. So we do it for the client. Even if they don't decide to work with us, at least they have better visibility to their spends. If you want us to do this, we have a letter of authority that we've had approved from vendors that we need approved, just saying that we're able to inquire with the mailing vendors on your behalf. Request any mailing reports that you may have from your vendors, current or historical. Provide an accounts payable export, just like we described before, and we'll provide the vendor names for you. We'll request specific PDF copies. We'll take those PDF copies and we'll create a login, or we'll use your existing login on the vendor's website, and we'll make sure every location is linked. And then we'll pull the data from all of those. We'll pull the data from the vendor's websites to consolidate it in a way to make it easy to see what's happening across all your locations. If you want us to look at UPS or FedEx, we ask for 1 to 6 months of UPS and FedEx invoice detail, and then meet with us to review the results. So we try to make it easy. You can do all of these things on your own with the tools that we're giving you in this deck. This is the main things to look for. It just requires doing the work. Once we have the data, we found that Excel spreadsheets are very difficult to manage because there's so many different data elements. There is equipment, there's postage, there's notes, there's contacts, there's activities. And all of those become much more difficult to manage when it's just all on just a spreadsheet. So we created over the last 11 years an enterprise dashboard platform that we give our clients to use. And what that does is it consolidates all the data across the organization in one screen. So you can see what your spend is across all the categories, across all the vendors. It gives a listing of the locations and what their spends are, when their leases expire, when their agreements are, how much postage everyone's doing. You can dive into a specific location and see what are the details there. You can see the notes and activities of everything that's been worked on. You can see the postage refill activities, including how much postage is sitting on the meter as of the last refill. And then in some cases, we can get the class level detail for you, so you can see a breakout of the details of every transaction. We find that by having the data centrally in some sort of web repository, it makes it easy to manage, and it makes it easy to find opportunities in the savings. If you want to manage this on Excel, that's absolutely fine. The things that you want to make sure in your reports is you want to have all locations, account numbers, and agreement terms. Agreement terms is when does the contract expire, what is included in those agreements. You want equipment and postage details, and you want notes and contacts with an activity management plan. So when, the notes of when do you need to, like, who you spoke to at the site, what was discussed, and then when do you need to reach out to that location in the future to manage whatever the activity is that's required. Spend management strategies. So mailing equipment, we recommend moving to 1 or 2 vendors that can provide a higher level of support, centralized billing, and national account pricing. We have some clients that we go to and they're just fragmented. Everybody's negotiating their own contracts. And sometimes these are billion-dollar companies that every location is just going to the mailing vendor and securing their own equipment. It's a terrible strategy because every company is looked at as like every location is looked like a local mom and pop and is negotiating their own rates versus capitalizing on the fact that you have spend across your organization that you can get national account pricing from those vendors. Postage meters. Consolidate your postage meters from those vendors into master billing accounts. So in other words, instead of having to fund each individual postage meter, you can fund one postage account and all meters can draw off it, and then you can get monthly reports from that system and see exactly the activity that everyone's doing. That gives you the ability to manage the balances in one account versus having to manage the balances in lots of separate accounts. Also, develop a strategy. Do you want to prepay for postage or do you want to borrow postage from the vendor? And stick to that strategy. We have lots of clients that go back and forth and money gets lost. Money is sitting now on both accounts in a prepay or an advance, and they end up paying like high fees and overcharges. So, and we'll talk more about fees, but if postage isn't managed properly, we find clients spending tens of thousands of dollars in unnecessary fees that could be avoided if they had more controls. USPS. So all the USPS permit accounts, if it's mail forwarding accounts, if it's business reply accounts, if it's PO box accounts, what we recommend is linking them to one USPS gateway account. The USPS has gone head over heels developments in their website. It used to be called CAPS, and that was very rudimentary. And then they created this business gateway, and it allows you to link every single permit account that you have into one place and be able to have visibility rights to what's happening there. Next, from that system, there's something called the electronic payment system. So instead of having to fund and run to the post office and cut checks and have all these different payment methods, you can set up single payment methods that can fund all of those different accounts from one place. And they can basically set up an ACH to your bank account, and it just makes it much easier. But the most important thing about these USPS accounts is they allow you to review transactions and balances for each account in one place. Outsource providers. So decide if you're going to use their permits or you're going to use your own. Manage the balances and have the details to the outsource provider spends. The outsource mail providers can be the Wild West. What one vendor charges versus another is very infrequently compared by clients, and that we see huge gaps in rates. There's also the question of, you sign a contract with an outsourced vendor, are you getting those contract rates? Not that many clients validate every charge on those types of invoices. And there's very little standardization to say, what am I paying at one vendor versus another to see, am I getting best rates? So outsourced providers can be one of the biggest mailing categories these days because so much work isn't done in-house anymore. So people can be spending significantly more with outsourced providers than the stuff they're doing in-house with very limited controls to it. And then UPS and FedEx maintain the details of the spend and fees to see what savings can be implemented. We'll talk more about UPS and FedEx and what things to look for. Fees and overcharges. The mailing vendors are far from perfect billers, and I'm not singling out any one of them. It's a universal across the category. There are lots of fees and different things you need to pay for with mailing equipment. There's the equipment side, there's leases, meter maintenance, postage advances, postage charges, and very few people have control of all these things because they haven't created sort of that central visibility to it all. So this is going to sound, so the strategies that we tell clients to put in place, and this is going to sound crazy, but it's very important, pay bills on time. And so that sounds obvious, of course we pay bills on time, but with postage bills especially, the vendors charge up to 22% interest plus late charges. And the payment terms typically aren't 30 days, they're slightly shorter than that. So it's like a credit card. If you're borrowing money from your credit card and you're using, credit cards are fabulous, and I recommend the advance accounts from the mailing vendors if they're properly managed, because you basically get to use the postage all month. At the end of the month, you get a consolidated bill with what all your offices charged, and you get to pay that bill. And there's typically very little charges, assuming you pay the bill on time and in full. The issue is that most AP organizations try to maximize the payment structures. They don't leave any buffer times. Bills don't get paid on time. They don't pay their late fees because they don't, or finance charges because they don't feel they need to. It accumulates over time, and we find companies spending tens of thousands of dollars on these types of fees because it's not managed. So if you're in those types of situations, and you need help getting it cleaned up, we do it all the time for clients. But the key thing with those accounts is pay on time and clean up any past due balances, because as long as you have a past due balance, you're paying 22% interest on that entire past due balance. Look at each invoice, validate that items are chargeable. There could be errors in the invoices. We find lots of errors on invoices. Cancel vendor equipment insurance. Most companies have their own insurance on the premise and they don't need vendor provided insurance. Every mailing vendor basically assigns vendor equipment insurance to every lease unless you provide a proof of insurance certificate on every agreement. So that often doesn't happen. We take care of that for clients. You can take care of that on your own. Some of the vendors have a loyalty program. Some of those loyalty programs are chargeable, and you probably want to, it's a question if you want to pay for their loyalty program. And the other thing is a lot of loyalty points go unused because people don't even know they have the loyalty program. You can cash those loyalty points in for credits on your postage accounts that can be used for postage or supplies. Make sure that your postage refill and advance account charges are included in agreements and monitored. So this isn't like, seriously, we've recovered $19 million from our clients in these types of fees and overcharges. Everybody has them, and it's important to look at bills and make sure they're being managed. Lost postage recovery. So we found over $12 million in lost postage for our clients sitting in dormant postage accounts. Plus, we have a database from the unclaimed state funds offices of over 55,000 transactions of returned postage meters that nobody ever got their money back. So why does this happen? So it happens that office closes, merges, or just turns in their meter. And when they're doing that, do they think, oh, I have money sitting in the postage meter and I have money sitting in that postage account that was funding that meter? How much is that? And in the lieu of closing that stuff, they just forget about it versus making a request to the meter vendor, seeing what the balance was, filling out the postage refund request form, and validating they got the check back. Oftentimes that process doesn't happen. So also the money, most of the time when someone sends a check for $10,000 of postage to fund a postage meter, most companies expense it at that point. But in fact, it's not an expense, it's an asset. That $10,000 that you sent into your postage meter, it goes into a bank account that is held for you for that postage meter. And the money in that bank account is either in the account that's funding it, or it's been deposited into the meter, which is also a bank account. So because of that, people aren't managing that process. Sometimes an advance account is used, so they're borrowing money from the vendor, but they have prepaid funds sitting idle, and it's not, and they don't know where money is being pulled. So the money is from one of the accounts just sits idle. So the steps to find this money is figure out what all your account numbers for your current and past postage meters. Enter these account numbers onto the vendor's website and see if there's any data available. Contact your meter vendor to validate any funds that are available or what you find online. And check the unclaimed funds databases to see if the funds were turned over. We can do this research for you and help you get them returned if you'd like, but these are the tools and the process that we would follow if you want to do it on your own. Technology changes. So there's a major change that's happening in the Postal Service as of June 2024, where all meters need to be constantly connected to the data center versus only when a meter is being refilled. So most meters today, sit not connected. And when you hit refill on your meter, it dials out to the meter vendor, puts the money in, and then the meter is basically, the connection is sort of ended. Newer meters put in the last 1 to 2 years, basically are constantly connected all the time. The issue is the meters that are 2 years or older, and from some of the vendors, it's even newer than that because they're just coming out with the meters that are compliant with this requirement, that all meters are going to have to be constantly connected to the network. And the reason the post office is doing this is because they want to make sure that they can monitor the activity in these meters in a much closer basis. They're going to have more complex rate structures. They're going to want to be able to report back on how people are mailing things. They want to be able to issue refunds to clients on like real time through the devices versus separately, and just for overall postal security. So we estimate that 70% of the mailing systems in the United States will need to be replaced by 2024. This amounts to probably about 400,000 to 500,000 locations with postage meters. 10% of the meters, and these are in the bigger equipment, is going to have a slightly later requirement of 2026. And we estimate there's probably about 20% of the meters that are in circulation out there are currently compliant. But this is a huge issue. 80% of the devices are going to have to be replaced with newer devices. You can't just put a network connector to this. You have to physically replace your device. This is going to be an issue for some IT departments who are hesitant to put meters on their network because of the increased traffic. We find financial services and healthcare are the two industries that really don't want meters on their network, and they fight it tooth and nail. They're going to have to spend, money to figure out other options with that. So the options for connections will be the following. You either have to connect to your network. You can buy vendor-provided mobile connectors that the mailing equipment vendors can provide that cost about $5 to $50 per month per device. The bigger devices, the bigger machines are going to have more closer to the 50. The smaller, more home office design ones are more like the 5. And also you could get your own mobile connection or external network connection that's not part of your network that could comply with this. This is a weird concept, but I'm going to try to make this easy to make sense. In many organizations, it's easier to send a $10 overnight through UPS or FedEx than it is to send a 57-cent letter. And you ask yourself, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, of course, it's easier to send a letter than an overnight, but it's not. And the reason is because of how we work. Most people in organizations work out of their homes or in field sites that aren't connected to a headquarters that has the right mailing equipment technology to get it out the door easily. So think about it. Like if you're using UPS, most companies have one main carrier, either UPS or FedEx, and they do their overnights that way through that service. Okay. They usually will use a free technology from UPS or FedEx, either called ups.com, UPS Campus Ship, or FedEx.com. These are free tools that support the shipping across the enterprise that UPS and FedEx provides. Everyone has universal access to that system. Whenever someone wants to use it, they go onto a website and they just print the shipping labels that they want to do. And at the end of the month, corporate gets a bill for the shipments that they did, and they charge it back to their cost center. Very easy, simple, standard process throughout the entire organization. Now think about mail. You have a corporate headquarters that has equipment, and very easy, you bring things down to the mailroom. But what if you're working remotely? What if you're working from home? You have to wait to come into the office. What if you're never in the office because you're a completely remote worker? What if you're in a small office that doesn't have any postage technology? Or you have to have separate meter technology in each individual office that you have to manage individual contracts to do. It's difficult. The beauty of it is, and the reason I'm going down there is the future state of where the mail industry is going, and the technology is here today, is to have enterprise postage access. And the same way that you would log into UPS Campus Ship or ups.com or FedEx.com, there could be a website that can print postage on the fly, and it can be accessible through all users at every location, creating a similar experience and making it easier. And the last thing you want is users saying, well, I don't have a postage meter. I don't want to drive to the post office. I'll just send it overnight. And I'll send $10 instead of 57 cents. We need to make 57 cents easier because not everything people send has to get there overnight. So enterprise web postage, we think, is the future of mail. And the reason is it works for all locations, including people who work from home and people who work in small offices. Users can log in from any PC and process postage. Each office would have an electronic scale. Postage is printed on sheets of stamps that you can order from the vendors, and postage can be charged back to any location or cost center. There are options to have single sign-on, and single sign-on means that any user inside your organization, as long as they're connected to their network and they've logged into their computer, would have access to this without even needing a username and password. They would just click on a link and they'd be in. And the moment that employee is no longer employed, they are booted out. Very important feature that large organizations like to have. The free UPS and FedEx systems don't have that feature. These new web postage tools can have that. If there's an office closure or divestiture, it's handled automatically. You don't have to return equipment and deal with figuring out all the equipment needs. There's no hardware to inventory and manage because the scales are disposable items. There's invoicing is streamlined because it's a very defined chargeback process. There's postage visibility to every single piece of mail. When you have a postage meter across an organization, and we manage, over 150,000 postage meters throughout the U.S. Pieces of mailing equipment throughout the U.S. Equipment sits out there, and someone fills for $100 or $500. across an enterprise, very few companies have any visibility to what that $500 is being used for, and they charge back the fact that we added $500 to our meter. When you use UPS or FedEx, you charge back every single piece of overnight or parcel that you sent out, and you charge that particular piece. You know who ran it, what class of service, what it was done. Online web postage has that ability, where postage meters typically don't, unless you have more elaborate accounting platforms, which usually the small, mid-sized devices don't have. 5 to 68% postage savings on many classes of mail over postage meters or buying stamps at the post office. So if you look at this chart here, a 1-ounce letter is 60 cents. If you buy it at the post office, it's 57 cents if you buy a postage meter or PC postage. Those are the same. But if you do priority mail, first class parcel, express mail, certified with electronic return receipt, there's huge savings up to upwards of 68% on the cost of those items. You know, as a safe average, we tell people average at least 15 to 20% of the savings of parcels and certifieds that you would get by having these types of web platforms. FedEx and UPS expansion. So FedEx, UPS, the campus ship and the FedEx.com and the UPS.com systems are good, but they're free systems designed to make your parcel processing easier for FedEx and UPS. It's designed to make it easier for them, but those systems have limitations. And I want to describe how these online web postage and shipping platforms can solve that. So the main is that if you go into UPS, so grounds, most people send the majority of their items through those platforms overnight, or an air service. And an air service is your 1-day, your 2-day, and your 3-day services versus ground. What most people don't know about ground is that ground in zones 2, which is 150 to 200 miles away from where you are, which is where a good chunk of packages go, ground is guaranteed next day. And if you're going, 300 or 400 miles away, it's guaranteed in 2 days. The free carrier provided systems do not give you that information. If you go on to UPS Campus Ship or FedEx.com and you go to process the package, what you see is the air rates. You see next day air, 2-day, and 3-day services. If you want to see when ground is delivered, the ground rates in that, you have to go into a different place in the screen, which pulls up the ground rates, but they don't compare them side by side against the air rates to show you that if you were going to send that out today, ground is an option, as is the air saver or the priority service. And here's the difference in rates. The systems, the free systems don't show you the post office options. FedEx and UPS charge residential fees of about $5 a piece. If it's going to a rural zip code, they charge an extra $3 to $5 as destination entry, delivery area surcharges, excuse me. And then they also charge fuel, which is now up to like 20% of the packages. The post office doesn't charge for those things. And so in many cases, if it's going to a resident and is lightweight, no matter what your discount is, by not having to pay the $5 plus the $5 fee plus the 20% fuel, the Postal Service can be much more cost effective and should be compared against your 2-day, 3-day, and ground services. These free systems these new multi-carrier web platforms have a residential delivery flag. So if you're sending it to most people and they're at the company address, but it's to their home that you're shipping it, many people don't know to click it as residential because they don't know someone's working out of their home. Or if you're in a small business that works out of its house, the issue is that you get charged the $5 residential fee after the fact from the free systems. With these types of platforms, they can have entire residential delivery databases that knows every residential address in the entire country, and they can flag that. You can print postage stamps on the same platforms. They can have certified mail with electronic return receipts that can do firm mailbooks and much more elaborate certified processes. And they have single sign-on, and that single sign-on we talked about before, the free carrier tools do not have, and it makes it much more difficult to control your users. The point of showing this is there's a lot of the savings with UPS and FedEx and the post office can be some of the largest savings that you can have, and these costs can be some of the largest as well inside an organization. In order for these web platforms to work, you need a central administrator. You need someone to manage these platforms to make sure that they work. You can't just put these things out and then say, great, we have the tool out, everyone take care of it themselves. It just doesn't work. You need someone to do the following. You need someone to define what the requirements are for the system. What things and features do you need for these systems to have? Someone has to have an implementation plan and work on implementing the system, training the users, onboarding users, managing the user's access, whether it's single sign-on or you're going to be managing usernames and passwords. Case management, we'll talk about this in a minute, but they're going to be users that are going to have questions, they're going to need to know how to do things or have issues. You don't want them calling the mailing vendor. You want to have someone on your side who can be the first responder to those issues. You need to monitor usage. You want to report on key metrics. You have to charge back the postage and the shipping costs back to the right cost centers, quantify the savings, and expand and promote usage throughout the organization. These systems work if you have dedicated people and resources in to do that. We manage these platforms for our clients. We're speaking from experience. We do this for large organizations or mid-sized organizations that have fragmented spends. And without these things in place, these systems don't work. The key and one of the biggest areas that you need the support method involved is case management. And so whether you need a service like us to do it or whether you want to do it on your own, you need a person to go to for those questions to be asked. Most organizations will manage those types of case issues on, people email people back and forth. We've developed a web-based case management platform that basically, anyone in the company who has an issue would hit this, they'd click the down arrow here, and we'd have a customized list of what are the main issues that they might have. They select what they are, type in who they are, and they get a case number. And that case number gets emailed to them and to our agent, and our agent would reach out directly to them, take care of their issue, follow up to make sure the issue's been resolved, send out a closed case email, and then report on all the issues that have come up to management on a monthly basis. And then if there's reoccurring issues that are happening all the time, figuring out, are there ways to streamline that so there can be fewer issues? Things like changing frequently asked questions guides, running additional training, working with the senior leadership to try to make the system easier. And all cases, notes, and activities are stored for archiving so you have complete visibility to it. Very important, though, if you're going to look at these types of platforms, that you have some structure to managing the users. So in summary, there have been large changes in the way we work, the way we work, where and how mail is generated. Costs are increasing rapidly. The USPS is forcing large equipment changes. There's new web-based technology, and the fact that people are going to have to make these changes is going to drive people to reevaluate how are they mailing things. There are large savings by having control of your enterprise postage and parcel spends. It's one of the largest unmanaged categories for most organizations. And the data needs to be consolidated into a form that it can be managed. So the hardest thing is taking all this raw data from all these different systems, getting into a way that can be managed, and pulling out those metrics that can be managed, because it's not just a one-time deal, it's something that has to be managed, on an ongoing basis. But with the right controls, there's efficiency and cost savings that can benefit the entire organization. And the savings that we typically see are in the 10 to 40% range, across most of these categories by having the right controls in place and optimizing the way that things are sent out. So just a little bit about us. We manage the mail spends for some of the largest organizations in the country. We have managed a portfolio of 179,000 pieces of mailing equipment, and our average client has saved almost $2 million. On the equipment side, which is how we got our start, we average 55% equipment savings. We have 215 years of experience in this. The web tools that we showed you and discussed were the only ones that we've seen that have any sort of consolidated web, multi-vendor, postage and equipment and services management tool that can consolidate all this data into one place where it's not managed on spreadsheets. We've spent 11 years building that architecture to support our clients. And we've also recovered $27 million in lost postage, overcharges, and fees. This money is out there for people, and it's just, if you don't look, it's not found. Our clients are every industry. It frankly doesn't matter what industry you're in. It just matters that you have, multiple, like a decent spend in the mailing category. And for any client, we'll do a no-cost analysis and we'll quantify what is happening today across any of the areas you want to look at and show you what opportunities you have for savings. These are done at no cost and no obligation. If you decide to move forward, we'll go implement the plan to help change, make the changes. If you want to do it on your own, that's absolutely fine as well. We just want a chance to be able to work with you. And we present all savings opportunities to you for approval. We don't approve anything ourselves. We manage it in a web dashboard, and we provide ongoing support. So we stay with our clients in many cases for years, even if they don't have current active projects, because they want this managed. And we find that clients always have things to change, whether it's acquisitions, divestitures, technology changes, meter changes are going to happen dramatically over the next couple of years. There's always something to do. We do these types of educational webinars because we find that it's the best way to educate you on what things you do need to consider, whether you do this on your own or you do it through us, but also to make you educated about what are the possibilities and what are the things you need to think about. So we run these continual throughout the year, especially around rate change time. We're always running rate change webinars, so we'll be sending you invites to other things that come up. But I want to thank you all for being on the call today, and we want to open it up to any questions.
Thanks, Adam. Hello, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the presentation today. I want to remind you that there are 2 different ways you can ask questions. You can either type them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand icon and we'll unmute you to ask a question. While you guys ask your questions or raise your hand, I did want to point out our social links. They're at the bottom of the slide. We do post there on a more regular basis with helpful mailing tips. So if you want to learn more from us outside of webinars, that is a great resource for you. So it looks like our first question is, what do you see as the biggest savings opportunity with having this type of management?
Sure. The biggest opportunity that we're seeing for clients right now is web postage and shipping. I know we put a lot of focus on that, but the ability to have a website that the company can go to across an entire organization, and then they can print whatever they want for postage. It can get rid of the majority of the mail equipment that they have out there. They can help pay for that. Usually, the mail equipment that gets returned and replaced with this, it's usually a 70 to 90% savings on the equipment side of it. It provides universal access, so it eliminates people spending thousands of trips to the post office or spending higher prices in postage than they need to. And then the UPS and FedEx savings are huge. Usually in the 6 to 15% savings on UPS and FedEx by being able to rate shop at a point of time and see all your options to make better decisions. The industry around UPS and FedEx savings has been very focused in the past about contract negotiations and around auditing shipments for late shipments and non-contract compliance. And all those things are great to do. But what's happening, we're finding, is that the carriers are basically at full capacity and much less interested in negotiating with clients, and people's discounts are starting to decrease. Also, on top of that, what we're finding is that the vendors, they're basically, people are signing contracts that say that they can't audit for late shipments and get refunds back. They waive their rights. So the only way that people can truly reduce costs and control their UPS and FedEx spends is to have tools that allow their end users to make better decisions at the point of shipment. And that's what these systems do. So we view that as the biggest opportunity for clients to save money and have increased controls.
Alrighty, our next question is, why do you think the post office is making everybody replace their meters?
I think the post office is trying to keep up with technology. They're trying to be able to offer higher levels of service, things like automatic refunds for clients inside the meters. And I think that the current meter technology, through the way that they're just connecting with a client at a point when the client does a refill, people are doing much less postage through their devices these days. And if a client only refills every 90 days, or, because every 90 days with postage meters, you're required by law to either do a meter inspection or to refill your meter. And that's not enough time for them to truly, that's too wide a gap for them to monitor people's usage and activity. And I think they want the data more real time to be able to control it.
Alrighty, well, if there are no further questions, I would like to thank everybody for joining today. Please be sure to fill out the survey that will appear at the conclusion of the webinar, and be sure to check out our social media pages to find more helpful information from us on a more frequent basis. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.